Thank you very much for that, Ali. So one question I have would be, what is the attitude of those participating in the conflict towards the work Mwatana does in documenting human rights?
Uh, okay, thank you so much for this question. Most of parties to the conflict, they don't like the work of Mwatana because we document all the crimes that they have done against civilians and civilians objects. So we had a lot of, I can say, bothering from parties of the conflict. For example, Houthis, they didn't, let our field researcher work on the ground. They detained many of the field researcher of Madra. The last incident was in Hajjah. They detained our field research in Hajjah for 3 days. And they detained one of our field researcher in Al Hudaydah also. So we try to, in spite of all the difficulties and hardships that we face in the ground, we try to overcome them and to continue our documentation process. So for sure they don't like our work because if you visit our website and see the products that Matram produce, you will find how horrific the crimes that they committed against civilians and civilian objects. We are not welcomed by all parties to the conflict throughout our work.
Now, I have a question. Firstly, thanks for coming out today. I really enjoyed the talk, but I was just wondering, do you feel like the war in Yemen has kind of become forgotten in the global media with the coronavirus and everything that's going on at the moment? That it's not really being reported anymore?
I think most of the outlets media and the NGOs around the world, they support the healthcare defenders, human rights defenders in Yemen, and they support Mwatana and they support the work that relating to the documenting these abuses and crimes. But sometimes, because the war in Yemen is in a country that is so far from the country or the international actors who involved in the war in Yemen. And Yemen is a poor country, so sometimes there is no out of interest for the international community to look at the tragedy of Yemenis during this bloody war. And so we appreciate all the support that offered from the outlets media, who they shed light on the tragedy of or the suffering of Yemenis during this conflict. And we urge all the human rights defenders and activists around the world to stand with Yemenis and try to present the suffering of Yemeni people during this war and to present the crimes committed by all parties to the conflict, especially those who has regionally influence. The state that participated in this war and committed many war crimes during this conflict.
Actually, just on the topic of the pandemic, what impact has COVID-19 had on the conflict in Yemen and on the people of Yemen?
Thank you so much for this question. I think it's a very important question. I can tell you that 50% of the healthcare facilities in Yemen are out of service because the devastated health system in Yemen, because of the ground shearing and the air strikes that targeted hospitals and medical centers. So I think the health worker cannot meet the need of the people who they may be infected by COVID-19. And they don't have a ventilator, for example. They don't have masks. They don't have a budget to run their hospitals, because sometimes parties of the conflict obstruct the humanitarian aid that comes to these hospitals. So I can tell you that many of Yemenis died because they cannot access to these hospitals. Sometimes hospitals existing in the near to the hostilities. So we don't have, the capacity to deal with this pandemic in general. We don't have tests to test these people who are infected by coronavirus, and also we have overcrowded prisoners inside the detention centers. And they might be infected by coronavirus during the spread of coronavirus in Yemen. So the situation is going from bad to worse because the coronavirus pandemic. And this is why we urge the international community to help the health system in Yemen, because they don't have the capacity to deal with such outbreak diseases.
I also have a question. Thank you very much for giving this talk. I saw recently that there were 4 Yemeni journalists who had been arrested in 2015 who were condemned to the death penalty by the Houthi authorities. So I was wondering, as an organization who is reporting on everything that's happening in Yemen, how do you process, and did you have, have you been physically or psychologically attacked by Houthi authorities?
We advocate all the time for these detainees, especially that were in arrest, how they have been detained by de facto in Sana'a, Houthis, in Salah. And by the way, we have a legal support unit in Mwatana. So we provide legal support for these who have been detained in the prisons of Houthis, especially journalists. So our lawyers in Mwatana followed up their cases, and they try to release these detainees. And we succeed to release many of the detainees around across of the country. So we had advocate for all these detainees, especially human rights defenders and journalists, and we support their cases in the de facto in Sana'a and the other authorities, the government in Marib and the other areas in Yemen. So we all time work to release these detainees.
Another question actually I have is, how much responsibility do you think states such as Italy and the UK, who sell weapons to people participating in the conflict, how much responsibility do they have for the war crimes that are being perpetrated in Yemen?
Thank you so much. Most of these weapons sold to Saudi Arabia and Emirates have been used to kill many of civilians in Yemen and destroy the civilians' objects. So they had a responsibility for these crimes in Yemen in any way. So if they stop these sales orders, we think they can put pressure on parties to the conflict to put an end for this war. So we in our investigation we found many of remnants of weapons that made in US and United Kingdom and Italy, and so these weapons have been used to kill and wounded and maiming many of civilians in Yemen, including children and women. So they got a responsibility for this crime. So we try to find a way and opportunities for accountability. Just even though for the companies who they sell these arms to these foreign parties. I think they have a responsibility for these crimes.
I have a very simplistic question. Do you actually see an end to this conflict? Like, do you see it ending someday, or do you think that it will take a very long time to end?
Well, this is a good question. We keep saying that we have hope, even though, in spite of all these crimes and violations committed by parties in the conflict, in spite of the that these conflicts push the country to procure famine in spite of the thousands of deaths because of malnutrition in children and pregnant women. We still have hope. And we believe that if there is a real and serious war from the international community, they can stop this war. They can bring all parties to the conflicts in the regional level or in the local warring parties. They can send them to sit on the table and start peace talks. To reach an agreement to stop this war. So we have a hope, and we are emphasized all the time throughout our work and partnership with many of the human rights defenders around the world, and we try to also to call all the society around the world to put pressure on their governments to just let or to put an end for this long suffering of Yemeni people. And we have a hope and that we can succeed and we can do it. First, I'd like to thank you all. And I feel very warmed with you during this conversation. And I hope you got all the necessary information about the works that Mwatana have done during this war and about the human rights situation in Yemen. And we appreciate here in Mwatana all the online activities like this to shed light on the armed conflict in Yemen.
As students and people who are not in Yemen and not from Yemen, what can we do to help?
As I said before, we need everyone knows about the armed conflict in Yemen and about the suffering that Yemeni people are facing during this armed conflict. So we will be glad if you speak about the war in Yemen, because it is a non-war. And even though these shocking records from the United Nations, so I urge you to invite people to visit, for example, Mwatana's website, and to read a lot about Yemen and about the suffering, about the famine, about the crimes, because there are a lot of crimes committed by our parties to the conflict because they believe in impunity more than anything else. So we need you to also support the works that coming from Yemen, because most of the NGOs in Yemen is got a lot of problems and hardships because they work in dangerous environment and consequences. So we need the support of all the, for example, societies around the world. So you have, you can help us in such things.